everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. And welcome to episode 224, Decoding Journal Article Norms. One of the things that I've been working with in faculty workshops that I've been doing at some universities during the spring is walking through the parts of a journal article and how to figure out how to recreate that on your own. So I've been doing this as part of a writing group. I've been doing this as part of a series on how to write a journal article in 12 weeks. But there's a lot of different ways that I've been going about doing it. And one of the things that I found that was really helpful, just as a general practice, I wanted to talk to you about today. One of which is the idea of having a model article as sort of your goal to write to. This is advice that's often given to academics, but I don't think anybody actually says, hey, if you look at your model article, this is how you're going to be able to recreate that same kind of article for the journal and have them actually take it. And that's because using a model article doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to replicate the model effectively. However, I don't think that that's a bad advice or a way to go when you're starting to work for a journal article. So, for example, many scholars write for different journals. I don't always submit things to the same journals. And because there are so many academic journals, a lot of times the writing process has to become just out of necessity new every time. If I'm writing for a new journal that's not like one of the old journals, I might understand some basics about academic writing. I might understand here's how you write an effective abstract, or here's some good ways to tie my literature into my findings. I might know all that. But there's a couple of different strategies that you can use to make sure that you're writing to meet your target journal norms and also using a model article effectively. So one of the things that I recommend when I'm working in groups who are trying to write journal articles is to first sort of back up and identify not just one target journal, but a grouping of them under whatever that discipline is. So, for example, I might be in rhetoric and composition or writing studies. That's my major discipline. But the area that I work in is more faculty writing studies or faculty productivity or graduate student writing practices. Those are much smaller. And so one of the things I encourage faculty to do is to basically drill down kind of as narrow as they could go and try to figure out a range of, say, 5 to 10 journal articles. Another thing that can happen from that practice then is to think through, okay, I've got these target journals now as sort of a grouping or a bucket. What features across them are shared? So, for example, one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the scholarship on faculty writing is that almost all of those articles are tying that discussion about how to help faculty writers to some discussion about improving productivity. When, as a writing studies person, I know those are not the same thing, but I'm just noticing that's the norm in a journal. So that means to me, by looking across journals, so not just one target journal, but say between 5 and 10, I'm looking to see where is the disciplinary conversation at the moment. And this is harder to do in some fields than others, but let's say you decide, okay, there's these, say, 7 journals that could potentially take an article that I'm going to do. Just spending time with the latest issue of all 7 of those journals is worthwhile, and just noticing where some of the trends are. For example, certainly in many, many fields, lots of journals are starting to focus on AI, but others are not. Maybe that's a topic that's sort of a no-go zone in your journal. Another thing to look at would be what type of evidence has to be presented. So if I looked at sort of my bucket of, let's say, 5 journals, 2 of them will really want empirical evidence, whereas the other 3 might take something that's a little bit different. So looking across, or not just at one model article, and really looking more at the norm in that sort of subgrouping of journal articles can be really, really helpful. And it doesn't really matter if you look at articles that are on your topic or not, although that's always helpful because then, of course, you can cite them if you're going to do that in the journal, or if you're going to try to pitch a manuscript for one particular journal. Another thing that I found that's really helpful is just getting a quick overview of how big the sections are and what kind of sections do these articles have. So, for example, when I looked at my 5 journals, some of my journals have a literature review out of a 20-page article that's 5 pages, but others only have really 2 to 3 paragraphs. that's a considerable difference. And so for me, making that determination about where I might submit work, if I have a lot of literature that I want to make sure that I'm covering, I'm going to go for the journal that's got more space to do that. So just making some trying to figure out what the norms are. Another thing that's sometimes helpful is to look at how data is presented. Some journals certainly like more of a visual representation with maybe some writing around it, but the visuals are really central to an argument. Whereas other journals don't have any figures or images at all. And your discipline might not do that, or you might not need them in your own research. But if you either want to use them or you could be compelled to use them, just a quick visual look is really useful. Another thing that we counsel a lot of faculty writers at Define Publish and Lead about is just looking at that citation list. If most of the articles in that journal, if you just look at one issue, don't cite more than 30 things, then you know that you can't really cite more than 30 pieces. And so it might be time to refocus your literature review, toss out some older references if that's relevant, and so on. And why we're doing this is just sort of looking at what are some things that are not too hard to uncover on the surface. They don't require a lot of reading of the actual article to determine what are some norms. Another thing I like to look at are titles and headings. So I'll do a quick skim through an article and say, okay, is this title really specific? Like it's revealing what the argument is right there with some keywords? Or is it more of a nuanced kind of creative title? That could be something that could be helpful for figuring out what goes in there. And then I also just look at how do they handle the methods, results, discussion? Is some of that stuff collapsed together? Are these separate sections? Is the discussion or implications section relatively small, or does it collapse with the conclusion? So I'm just looking structurally at a couple ways those articles might look. And then once you've looked through all that, usually you can figure out maybe a first choice journal to pitch a manuscript to, or a second choice journal home based on some of those norms and what you think you can reasonably accomplish. So for example, if one journal likes having a lot of figures and images and you don't have any to provide, that's probably not your first choice. That's also the same if maybe you don't want to have kind of a cutesy title, although certainly, you can do some crowdsourcing with that to maybe figure out some options or look at some that are already out there and get inspired. Another resource I want to point you to, I know I mentioned this on our podcast every single week or almost every single week about Textbook and Academic Authors Association because I love them and they're one of our sponsors, but they are giving away a free book. Yes, whether you're a member or not, you don't have to be a member to get this free book. It's an ebook on academic journal articles called Decoding Academic Writing. So inspiration for this podcast title today. But I just tested this out. I am a member. I tested it through the non-member download. So if you click on non-member download and just pop your email in, you get the copy of the book emailed to you. So whether you want to join the organization or not, they do give away their very latest ebook for free. And since so many of us are writing academic journal articles, I think this one would be really helpful to get and also to use as we support students that we might be working with. So it has a little list of some of the things that are in the book. One of the things that I really like about it, well, actually, there's two things. One is this idea of manuscript matchmaking, where they're talking about finding a journal home. I talked through some of those things today, but this book offers far more to decide where's the best place for your manuscript, particularly when you're trying to decide between 3 and 4 places and you don't have a lot of time to wait around for one journal to potentially say no and then have to do it all over again. So I like that a lot. The other thing I like about it is that this book does consider the life cycle of your journal article after it's published. So there's this whole section on what to do after your journal article is published, which I think is really helpful. I've talked on this podcast before about that kind of career management type stuff, about how to promote your work and to keep your scholarship alive. Doing that kind of promoting and figuring out, how best to leverage this new publication in the world A lot of that is just part of the academic publishing life cycle. So it's something that we all need to do, for better or for worse. And some of us even need to prove it for, say, talking about like impact on the public or how your scholarly work is reaching more of a wider public. So that section in that book is really helpful. And as I mentioned, it is totally free. If you're already a member for TAA, you can download all the ebooks. But if you are somebody that hasn't ever tried them, right now, they don't have any other ebooks and they always let the first one go for free. So if you want to check that out, you can see Decoding Academic Writing at TAA.net. And if you look at non-members and download, you can click there and get your free ebook. I will put a link in the show notes, but hopefully this was helpful. As a reminder, I've said this on previous episodes, but if you ever want to talk through something for 30 minutes, we do free consultations and happy to talk about your scholarly articles or anything else. There is a link to a free consultation on our webpage at Defend, Publish, and Lead. Happy writing this week.